Moscow, just past midnight. A senior American intelligence officer wakes up in his hotel bed, and the room will not stop spinning. His ears are screaming with a high-pitched ring that wasn't there when he fell asleep. He tries to stand and falls. He crawls back to the bed, hoping that by morning it will pass. It does not. Thousands of miles away, in a small apartment in southern China, another American official lies, awake, listening to a strange metallic sound circling above his sleeping child's crib, a sound with no visible source. These two men have never met. They work for different agencies, in different countries, years apart. But what happened to them would become one of the most disturbing unresolved cases in modern intelligence history. Some call it Havana Syndrome. For 9 years, the US government called it imaginary, greater than. Then, in 2026, they found the weapon. Welcome back. If you're new here, we investigate real crime and unexplained cases that rarely get the serious, in-depth treatment they deserve. Today's case isn't a murder, but by the end of this video, you may believe it's something worse. A story spanning 3 US presidents, 7 official investigations, over 1,000 suspected victims, and a government that spent 9 years insisting none of it was real. This is the story of Havana Syndrome. To understand this story, you have to meet the man who became its most public face. Marc Polymeropoulos spent 26 years inside the CIA's Directorate of Operations. Not a desk analyst, he recruited sources in dangerous back alleys, ran operations through the war zones of Iraq and Afghanistan, and eventually rose to oversee clandestine operations across all of Europe and Eurasia. Colleagues considered him one of the agency's sharpest field officers, the kind of person sent when the stakes were highest. By December 2017, Marc had built a life most people would envy, a respected career, a family, decades spent navigating hostile environments without a scratch. He'd faced real, physical danger more times than he could count and walked away every time. He was scheduled for a routine work trip to Moscow, a meeting with the US ambassador and Russian officials. Nothing about it stood out. He checked into a hotel a few blocks from the embassy, the kind of assignment he'd done dozens of times before. He went to sleep that night expecting an ordinary morning. In the middle of the night, Marc woke with a violent start. The room was spinning, not the mild disorientation of standing up too fast, but a full, sickening vertigo that would not stop. A piercing ring tore through his ears. He tried to stand and immediately fell. For a man who'd spent his career staying calm under fire, this was different. This was a total loss of control over his own body, and it frightened him in a way 3 decades in war zones never had. He assumed it would pass by morning. It didn't. The vertigo, the ringing, and a crushing headache stayed with him for days, then weeks. When he returned to the US and reported to the CSO medical office, he asked directly, "Is this Havana Syndrome?" He was told knew his symptom profile. By early 2018, his condition had worsened. Brain fog set in. His long-distance vision failed to the point he sometimes couldn't drive. The agency he'd served for 26 years responded, in his own account, with indifference. In 2019, unable to keep working, Marc retired. He wasn't the first officer this had happened to. He would not be the last. And the story of what actually happened to him stretched back 2 years earlier, to a US embassy on a Caribbean island. Rewind to late 2016, in Havana, Cuba. American diplomats posted at the US embassy began reporting a bizarre set of symptoms: sudden headaches, dizziness, memory problems, and in several cases, a piercing directional sound seeming to come from nowhere. Some described a wave of pressure, like standing too close to a speaker, except there was no speaker, and often No sound anyone standing a few feet away could hear. Doctors labeled it anomalous health incidents. The public called it Havana Syndrome. If it had stayed contained to one embassy, it might have remained a local mystery. It didn't. Within a year, similar cases surfaced among U.S. personnel in China, then Russia, then Australia, Colombia, Austria, eventually Vietnam. Diplomats in Paris and Geneva reported it. A Pentagon official said he experienced it at a NATO summit in Lithuania. By the mid-2020s, officials estimated the number of suspected cases at well over 1,000 people, spread across nearly 100 countries. This wasn't isolated, it wasn't rare. And whatever it was, it appeared to be following America's most sensitive intelligence and diplomatic personnel around the entire globe. For years, the government struggled to explain what was happening, and some explanations bordered on absurd. One early theory blamed the Havana sound on crickets. Researchers studied insect recordings, trying to match mating calls to the audio victims described. Other officials floated mass psychogenic illness. The idea that stressed diplomats were essentially making each other sick through anxiety and suggestion. A modern version of mass hysteria. To the men and women living with real vertigo, tinnitus, and traumatic brain injuries, this was infuriating. One of Marc's own CIA colleagues, during art therapy sessions at Walter Reed Hospital, painted a piece he simply titled "The Gunshot," because that's what the attack had felt like. Victims say that for years, they were treated less like patients and more like problems to be managed. Some were quietly pushed out of their careers. Others were denied basic medical care. It took a wave of public pressure and investigative journalism before CIA leadership began taking the cases seriously. And even then the question repeated if it wasn't crickets. And it wasn't mass hysteria. What or who was actually doing this? In 2024, a joint investigation by The Insider, Der Spiegel, and 60 Minutes dropped a bombshell. Reporters said they traced a pattern connecting Havana Syndrome incidents to a specific Russian military intelligence unit, the same unit. Western intelligence has linked two poisonings and sabotage operations across Europe. Investigators noted something chilling. The officers being hit weren't random. According to one former Defense Intelligence Agency official who ran the internal investigation, the pattern kept pointing to the agency's very best performers. D. Moscow denied everything, calling the accusations baseless, a fault text. But a year earlier, in 2023, 7 U.S. intelligence agencies had already released their own formal assessment, and it stunned the victim community. Their consensus: it was very unlikely a foreign adversary was behind a sustained global campaign. The case appeared to be quietly closing, unresolved, unexplained. CNN broke the story first. Sources said a division of Homeland Security, in an undercover operation, had purchased a mysterious device for what officials described only as an 8-figure sum funded through the Pentagon. The device was small enough to fit inside a backpack. It contained components of Russian origin, and according to multiple sources briefed on the matter, it was capable of emitting pulsed radio frequency energy, exactly what a National Academies of Sciences panel had flagged years earlier as the most plausible explanation for the symptoms. The Washington Post added another disturbing detail. A government scientist in Norway had secretly built his own version of a similar pulsed microwave device back in 2024 and tested it on himself to see if it was truly harmless. It wasn't. He developed neurological symptoms that closely echoed what Havana Syndrome victims had described for years. Then, on March 8, 2026, 60 Minutes aired the report that changed everything. Investigators revealed that secret military lab tests conducted on animals, using the recovered device, produced symptoms strikingly similar to Havana Syndrome. After 9 years of denial and doubt, there was finally something the government could not explain away. For victims like Marc Polymeropoulos, the 2026 revelations felt like vindication 9 years too late. But vindication isn't the same as an answer. The government still hasn't officially confirmed the device was used against American personnel. No one has been charged. No foreign government has been formally blamed. And the device itself, where it came from, who built it, how many times it may already have been used, remains classified. One name is missing from this story's ending. Michael Beck, the very first person to publicly report symptoms consistent with Havana Syndrome back in 2016, died on January 29, 2026, just weeks before the device story broke. He'd lived with a Parkinson's diagnosis since his mid-40s. Years earlier, he'd filed a claim over his condition, was denied. He never got to see the moment the world started believing him. 9 years, over 1,000 victims, 96 countries, and one physical device now sitting in a U.S. military lab. Still, the most important question in this entire case remains completely unanswered. Who pulled the trigger? This case is still active. Congressional committees are still requesting answers. The device is still being tested. And somewhere, whoever is responsible, if they exist, is still out there. If you want us to keep tracking this story as new information comes out, tell us in the comments and let us know what you think really happened. Russia? Something else entirely? If this kept you up at night, there's more where that came from. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Next week we're covering a case just as unsettling as this one. Thank you for watching. Stay curious. Desafi.